Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Haff, SQL Server Database Administrator with Extivia. I've been playing with SQL Server for a long time, since SQL 6.5 days, focusing on SQL Server, staying away from all the different other technologies that were emerging at the time, and focused on databases for over 25, I guess closer to 30 years. Today, I'll be having Kat, the manager of database administration at Extivia, help along with our presentation. Kat?
I'm Kat. I'm the manager of the SQL Server team here at Extivia. I've been working with SQL Server since the 6.5 days. Been with Extivia now for the last 10 years, and a lot of the stuff that Ken's going to be going over today are definitely little tips and tricks and stuff that we have learned on dealing with the network blips that you can see when you're dealing with an always-on configuration.
Great, thanks, Kat. So during your day as a database administrator, dealing with always-on or clusters or just applications, you may be troubleshooting transient timeouts, intermittent failovers, or almost failovers. Users may complain about taking a long time to log in, or their app is timing out at random times. And you look and you see really nothing jumping out. You might see a higher async network IO and DMOS wait stats. That could be an indicator. If it's 10, 15 minutes of async network IO, you might go to your network people and ask them what's going on. So they come back with, well, the network's fine. They look, and in fact, you're hardly using any of the bandwidth, so go away. So you're left at a loss. So what now? So I'm going to go through just kind of a back and forth with Kat, a typical interaction with the database administrator that calls, and they're at the end of their rope. They've looked at everything. SQL looks fine. It looks like a network issue, but their network folks say that it's not, and the business has just about had enough. So Kat, we're going to start our little role play.
Okay. Hi, Ken. Thanks for joining me on the meeting today. I'm having some issues in my environment, and I was hoping that you could come in and kind of take a look, see if there's something that I am missing. I'm dealing with a lot of timeouts showing up on my monitoring. They're not consistent, though. They happen at random different times during the day and everything. I'm not able to really kind of pinpoint what's causing the timeout. But obviously, in stuff with our monitoring tools, we're getting a lot of noise letting us know that we're getting a lot of connection timeouts with our always on. And then randomly at different other times and stuff, our customers and stuff are complaining that our application, that it's just like arbitrarily times out on them. And I've looked at the SQL Server settings, I've talked with my network admins, everybody says everything's okay, but obviously it's not. So I was hoping maybe you could just kind of come into my system, take a look, let me know what I'm missing. So just to let you know, though, we are running our SQL servers on VMware. So these are not physical machines, they're actually virtual machines, and it is an on-prem environment.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Have you included your VM admins in any of the conversations? If they looked over anything from their side, there's a lot of special configurations that have to happen for SQL Server when you run in VMware. So have you talked to them at all about anything along those lines, or are we going to be kind of leading them through?
Yeah, well, I've talked with them in the fact that I'm experiencing these issues. I've asked them to look at the system, but obviously as a DBA, I'm not really a VM admin and stuff like that, so I don't know specifically what they need to be looking at. I've asked them to look, and they're like, no, everything looks good to us. So that's really kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay, great. Well, that's typical. The DBAs really need to have a relationship with not just their network guys, but their Windows admins and their VM admins and their storage admins, because there's so much outside of SQL Server that can affect SQL Server, and it's not poor little SQL's fault. So it's a good idea to get those relationships. For now, there's some things we can look at so that we have a little bit of information when we go to these people to say, hey, check your stuff. I'm going to send you a couple have you run, send me the output. This right here, so with AlwaysOn, VMware requires that you use the VMX Net3 for a cluster, Windows failover cluster. That is a requirement. So if you're using the Intel adapter, first, that's your problem. So make sure you're using the VMX Net3, but make sure it's configured. So this little PowerShell script, run it as administrator on the box that we want to look at directly from the box or from a remote desktop. And let's look at the output from this. I have a hunch that there's a lot of things that haven't been configured. There was an update that came out back 2-3 years ago that wiped these settings. Now I'm told now that it no longer does that. So, but there's a lot of machines out there that still have this problem because nobody's thought to look at it. So we're going to go ahead and have you run this script and send me the output.
Okay, should I be running this on like node 1 of my AlwaysOn cluster, or where does this need to run at?
This should be run on all nodes participating in the cluster. And in fact, you should check all of your SQL boxes to make sure it's configured. But certainly in this case, we're troubleshooting a particular AG. Run this on all 3 nodes, and if 3 nodes, 4 nodes, however many nodes, and send me the output. Let's see how these NIC cards are configured.
Okay. All right. Let me go ahead and get that run for you really quick. All right. So I just sent you the output.
Okay, I got it here. Okay, that's what I thought. These, all of these entries here should be filled in. There's the ring size, the transmission queues, the buffers. None of these are set. And you also see receive side scaling is disabled. That's probably the biggest one out of all of this. This allows parallel IO to your receive buffers when it's enabled. If it's disabled, you get 1 core servicing 1 receive buffer at a time. So it's serial. And that's really where a lot of your aggravation with AlwaysOn is coming from. The receive can't keep up. And as you know, in AlwaysOn, there's a lot of not just traffic coming from your users, but there's that synchronization traffic, and that really does have a tendency to overwhelm the VNICs without sufficient receive buffers and parallel IO. So we have a fix for that. This script I'm going to send you will, first thing it does, it resets the NIC back to factory default and restarts the adapter. That will fill in most of your missing settings. For SQL Server, though, there's some more that we want to do to optimize it for SQL Server and the workload that it has to deal with. We make sure receive side scaling is enabled. That was the big one. But then we go ahead and adjust the receive throttle, the buffer sizes, and configure support around RSS. Receive side scaling, make sure that's all configured right. These are all for SQL Server. And if you've ever had to make VMX Net3 work with Exchange, it's the same set. So if you've worked with Exchange, just set it up just like Exchange and you'll be fine. So go ahead and run this script and then send me the, then run the first script I sent you. Send me the output and let's see what effect it.
Okay, well, obviously, before I run these scripts, I got to check with my sysadmins and everything, because I can't update anything from the OS standpoint. All I can do is just kind of talk with them about it and everything. So you're talking about the RSS, I think is what you called it and everything for. So can you go into a little bit more detail so when I talk with my sysadmins or my VM admin, I can be a little bit more knowledgeable of what that setting is, so I can help explain it to them. Because my biggest concern, I'm going to say, okay, I need to have this modified. They're going to come back to me and ask me, okay, why?
And they probably will, unless they've heard of receive side scaling or dealt with Exchange. They won't know what this is, and you may get some pushback. You may have to go into some meetings and explain what is it you're trying to do at length. But we're DBAs, we're not network admins. The bottom line is this is the settings we need for SQL to work. Receive side scaling allows, if you have multi-processor server, it allows more cores than one to service a receive queue. So your traffic is going to pile up in one queue. More traffic is going to pile up behind it. You'll get packet drops. So basically your transmission has to resend because it didn't understand what it says, say that again. So it sends it out again. And of course, it on an already overloaded NIC card, these resends, it just exasperates it until everything just comes to critical mass, stops naturally with no traffic coming through. Well, the bottleneck is gone and it works again for a while. This is especially important with data warehouses that move volumes of data around. It can saturate a single queue in no time. So you really want to open that up, enable receive side scaling, enable more than one core. If you have 8 cores, let all 8 cores service an individual receive buffer or receive queue and get that parallel IO going for you.
Okay. And then you were mentioning something about like the ring buffers and stuff like that. I mean, you're kind of speaking Greek to me. That's kind of network. What is that?
So that just, it's basically increases the size and the amount of data that the VNIC can absorb in bursts before it starts dropping packets. It allows more time for this data to get picked up by the CPUs and processed over to SQL Server.
So it's kind of like its own little timeout.
It's not a timeout so much as a bigger bucket, more buckets and bigger buckets. Think of it as just a bucket to hold the overflow until it can drain out the bottom.
Okay. All right. So
and receive side scale gives you more than one hole in the bottom of the bucket to let it drain out.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, obviously, if I'm going to talk to my sysadmins about this and stuff, they're going to want me to provide some documentation. Do you have any documentation that I could provide to them to kind of show where the different settings are at that they need me modifying? Because a lot of times when I deal with my sysadmins are like, this is the way we set up every single, VM, guest and everything like that. We're not making any modifications. So obviously I'm asking them to make modifications. So is there documentation that's out there that I can be using to help have this conversation and help justify this with my sysadmins?
There absolutely is. There is a ton of white paper that VMware, ESX have published around how to configure a VM host to support guests that are going to be clustered, Windows clustered. Of course, AlwaysOn depends on that. So there's a lot in there that you have to do to get that cluster so that it works well on a VM. Then you go from there. They have another white paper that talks about how to configure SQL Server on the guest of a VM. And it goes through, it actually talks about specifics around the VMX Net3, around thin provisioning and why not to use it. All the different settings that as a DBA, we really don't care about or have direct control over. We do need to make sure that our admins are giving us a platform that SQL Server can run on successfully.
So, all right. Hey, Ken, our sysadmin said that they're perfectly good with running these scripts and everything. I had the output and stuff from that initial script that you sent me. Do you want to kind of review it and take a look at it, or? Sure,
I got this here. So you can see this, it's filled in. We have receive side scaling is enabled. This is automatically set. The adaptive ring sizing, the RX rings 496, they're basically maxed out. Receive throttle, receive TS completion depth. That's a big one. Couldn't tell you why, but I know it's important. Data descriptor length. Again, I'm a DBA, not a network guy. I just want my SQL Server to work well. And this is what I found works very well. So tell me, how's your performance? Has it gotten any better?
I haven't gotten any phone calls and stuff since we made this modification from our app owners of anything timing out on them. And it's very rare, if ever at all, I'm seeing absolutely any other timeouts that are happening inside of my SQL Server error log. So my phone is no longer blowing up from my monitoring tool, letting me know that I'm having an issue. So things are running really smoothly. So thank you very much.
Very good. You may find that you from time to time, you may see your old friend pop up in the error log. If you do, there's some Windows clustering settings sensitivity, particularly if you're across subnets. You can increase your cluster sensitivity. There's some other things that we can do to make the things more resilient. This is really the big one. If you still have one, some one-off, go ahead and reach out to us and we'll take a bigger look into your cluster and see if there's something more that we can do to silence that. It really should not be alerting unless there's a problem.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, hopefully I won't have to call you back, but if I do, I'll talk with you soon.
We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Kat. Have a great day.
Thank you.
That was basically how an interaction like this goes when a DBA has tried everything. They've reached out. They know there's a network problem, but they just can't seem to get traction on it. This is a good way. It does two things. It starts a conversation between the DBA and your VMware people and your network people. So if you haven't already had a relationship with them, this is a good way to show, look, there's things that you can do to make all of our lives easier. Have them read that documentation, show them the benefit of the improvement. And you might win them over. They might start partnering with you more. As you see, the culprit just might be the NIC. Well, as a DBA, that's not us, but we do have skin in that game. The configuration, incorrect configuration, the bottlenecks, the VMX Net3 is the adapter you should be using. Hands down, it's required. VMware requires it for clusters. Check to see if RSS is disabled. Go ahead and set those receive buffers and everything. Make sure that they're enabled and have values in them. I use large values for SQL Server. The fix we saw, we reset to factory default. We set the required settings and then restarted the adapter. We did not have to reboot. Sometimes though, a server will come along where you reset the adapter and it doesn't come back. So you should prepare for a reboot just in case, as you would with any box. You schedule your downtime in case the worst should happen, you need to reboot. Windows has a global setting. You want to make sure it's enabled in Windows. Most of the time it is, but it's netsh int TCP show global. You should just enable in Windows. You saw the receive side scaling. We talked about if the problem still happens, we can alter some cluster settings. These are the settings. I would use caution when you start messing with these. Go ahead and reach out to one of our team members would be glad to give you some advice for your particular environment. These have to work hand in hand with the SQL Server AlwaysOn. The default is 10. A lot of times we have to bump that up to 20, but these should all be kind of in the same. You move one, you want to adjust the others. This talks about a little bit more about the cluster settings that we would adjust if needed, especially this cross subnet. If you're always on is in different subnets, we might have to play with that. You can also check from Management Studio. There's a query that will give you the settings out of SSMS. You also want to make sure that you're not running your memory into the ground. I see a lot of boxes where Windows is just screaming for mercy. It's at 98% utilization. It's paging, and they're wondering why it's failing over from time to time. And that's because it's exhausted all memory and it's paging, and it just doesn't have. It's not keeping up. Try to get your memory utilization to no higher than 82, 79 to 81% is a good spot. So in conclusion, carefully consider what you're doing with your timeouts and with your particularly your cluster settings. because increasing those timeouts will make it more tolerant, but it'll also slow down your reaction. Instead of starting to fail over in 10 seconds, well, it's not going to start failing over until 20 seconds. So an extra 10 seconds. If that's not a big deal, just be aware. You know, your environment might be different. Start with the baseline and make adjustments. You should see immediate improvement just by enabling those buffers. But keep tabs on it, tune it, get your VMware folks to review that VMware doc, make sure the cluster, all those requirements have been followed at the cluster level, and then go on and make sure that all the SQL requirements have been followed. At the end of the day, if your SQL server is configured right, and the environment it lives on is configured right, you'll have a better day. Okay, thanks, folks. That was our presentation today. I really appreciate your time. I hope it was helpful. If there's any questions you want to reach out for just conversations about anything we talked about today or anything about your SQL server, feel free to reach out. There's my email address. I'm Ken Haff. I look forward to hearing from you.